Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Hashtag Leadership, What's on Your Mind? Remember, we're a podcast to make you stop and think about your leadership journey, and we're going to add value by speaking to amazing people with amazing stories and experts in their fields. So before we go any further, this is episode 96. We are nearly at 100. So make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow us on your podcast provider, and very soon we are going to be getting to that 100th episode. So make sure you look out for it. So today we are speaking to Andy. How are you doing, sir?
Very good. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today. We've bumped into each other a couple of times this year, delivering on some work that I've been doing alongside a few of my other associates and amazing people that have actually been on the podcast as well. And I heard you speak a couple of times in front of your people, if you like, the organisation. I'm being as generic as possible here without giving anything away. And your story is amazing and delivered really well. And it really helped us when we were delivering the culture change programme as well. So without further ado, I'm going to get you to introduce yourself for those people who don't know you, and I'll hit the 20-minute timer. Andy, over to you.
Fantastic. Well, yes, so I am currently the Director of Deployment at Greene King. And for those of your listeners that maybe haven't come across the business, we are the UK's leading pub and brewery chain. We have about 2,700 pubs and quite a substantial brewing operation as well. So my role as kind of Director of Deployment is to really help our pub managers get the right people in the right place at the right time, which I always hesitate at because it sounds a bit of a cliche, but it is really and truly what me and my team do. And as you can imagine, in the current climate, it's kind of no mean feat. But I also spend quite a bit of time working across the organisation, helping the business to make the right decisions and consider the deployment angle in kind of everything we do, whether that be investing in hours or saving hours. There's barely an initiative that doesn't involve people somewhere. So yeah, plenty to keep me busy. And yeah, having been there just under a year now, it's been a fantastic journey learning all about pubs as well. I have to say, there is no better office sometimes than one of our buzzing bars of a lunchtime. So yeah, it's been a great journey for the last few months.
Amazing. And again, just from that, people can obviously hear and tell now that what a great opportunity to have you on, because you're living and breathing all the stuff that we talk about on the podcast. So, and I know you've got an amazing story to share. So, well, hashtag leadership, what's on your mind? And what comes to your mind when you hear the word leadership?
I think the thing for me that I always reflect on, I think, is the word cohesion. I think we sometimes think about leadership as very much kind of being out in front and driving a single agenda almost at the expense of everybody else. But in my experience, it's much more about bringing people together, and whether that's people in your own team and getting them working well together, or actually other leaders across an organisation. Because I think there is far more value in kind of the collaborative power of an organisation and a number of leaders together than trying to kind of go off at a tangent or kind of drive your own agenda at the expense of everyone else. So yeah, cohesion for me, I think, would be the kind of word that sticks out.
Brilliant, amazing. And I'm smiling here because, again, we mentioned about we're coming up to 100 episodes. The amount of different varieties of what people take away from the word leadership is phenomenal, and that's one I've not heard before. So brilliant, well done you. So staying with you personally, where do you think your leadership journey started? So is it on reflection? Now we're sat here, or now that you know you're coming onto this and you're going to ask it, or was there a light bulb moment at the time? How far back are we going?
Yeah, so I guess my leadership journey, I suppose, started a good few years into my career with M&S. So I joined Marks and Spencer as a young management trainee, and spent the first few years very much, I suppose, building my management skills. It was a lot about the practical day-to-day element of running a store, leading a team, but focused very much on the kind of the day-to-day piece. And it probably wasn't really until I got my first store manager appointment that I felt that switch from being a manager to being a leader. And all of a sudden, kind of as a fresh-faced 20-something kind of individual, having to bring a team of people in a store, some of whom had been in that store longer than I'd been born, was a real challenge. And you learn very quickly what resonates with people and what doesn't. And you know, sometimes you have to put that kind of young sort of ego and kind of bravado to one side and really actually listen to your team and understand what they're looking for from you, rather than what you think you're kind of necessarily going to bring to for them.
Yeah.
So
amazing, awesome. And I've just thought, actually, the next question is probably going to lead me on to you sharing the story about what you talked about at the Elevate workshops. But regards to having an impact on your leadership journey, is there one particular person or one particular moment that has had a real quite profound impact on your leadership journey now, like who you are now and what you're now doing?
Yeah, but very much so. And I think that probably the moment came sort of about, I don't know, just under halfway into my kind of M&S career. And I was running a store down on the South Coast at the time. And I remember the day vividly. It was the 1st of December. It was my day off. I was sat at home kind of with a cup of coffee, as you do. And the phone rang, and it was our area manager's PA. And she said, I've had a message. I need you to go down to Bournemouth. There's a meeting been called quite urgently. And I was like, okay, this is a bit inconvenient. You know, I just sort of settled down for a nice relaxing day, but obviously sensed the tone and therefore dutifully headed off to our Bournemouth store and kind of met up with a number of other managers that had been called in from across the patch. And what was kind of briefed to us then over the kind of next few minutes was a real shock, to be honest. So one of our big out of town stores on the South Coast, which wasn't very old, had been very unceremoniously closed down that morning, and an order had been put in place to, in effect, evacuate the store and indeed the entire shopping centre, because of some quite serious concerns around the structural integrity, literally to the point where they were worried that this thing could collapse at any minute. So
minor health and safety.
Yeah, just a minor thing. So consequently, here we were as an area with one of our biggest stores shut with no notice whatsoever, 4 weeks before Christmas. The store absolutely full of both kind of perishable food and kind of seasonal merchandise. We'd got probably in excess of 200 staff that all of a sudden had nowhere to work, and several thousand customers who also hadn't got a clue what was going on and where they were going to be able to do their Christmas shopping or collect their orders. So we were all a bit like, oh, okay, what do we do here? There isn't really a textbook kind of procedure for dealing with something like this. And my area manager took me to one side after the briefing and said, look, I really need somebody to kind of be by my side over the next few days, to be my eyes, my ears, my conscience, because I haven't got a clue how I'm going to manage this, but I know I've got to do it, and I could really do with a bit of support. You know, are you up for it? So I was like, yeah, absolutely. And therefore what panned out over the next few days was, say, probably some of the biggest inspiration that I've taken around what good leadership looks like. And I got to see the highs and lows of it. I got to see the time when we kind of, you know, really sort of brought people together. Everyone was very kind of motivated to go off and do what was needed. And I saw the lows as well. I saw the times when we were sat in an office at, you know, gone midnight, talking to each other, going, are we really doing the right thing here? What are we going to do? But I'm really pleased to say over those kind of 4 days, what was achieved across the patch was phenomenal. So we managed to rehome over 200 members of staff. We didn't lose a single employee over that period. We managed to empty an entire store of all of that stock and get it redistributed. And also to kind of ensure that several thousand customer orders, again, were all rerouted to neighbouring stores, and those customers were kept informed. And we even got as far as reopening a dormant sales floor in our Bournemouth store. Again, that was done in 4 days, a job that would normally take months and months. But it was the cohesion that kind of that area manager brought to the process, and getting all of the right people involved and kind of bringing that kind of collective spirit, which got us to where we were. And it was an amazing experience. And there's probably 3 things that I took from it. First and foremost, it gave me a very good insight into the sort of thing I enjoyed as a career, and it actually had quite a big impact then on the career direction that I took after that. The second thing, I kind of really learned the value of looking after your people as part of a leadership strategy, and actually not to overlook kind of how you bring people together, how you look after them, how you support them alongside all of the practical side of it. And the third thing that's always sort of fascinated me since then is this whole concept of crisis leadership, and why we are so much more effective in a crisis than we are in our normal day jobs. And it's something that I always kind of reflect back on now. If I'm in a situation where it doesn't feel like I'm quite getting the results that I'm looking for, or a situation that feels great, I always sort of think, okay, well, if this were a crisis, what would we be doing differently? And sometimes that can just unlock a different way of working or a refocus and kind of keep things moving. So yeah, a hugely influential opportunity, very stressful at the time, but one I always look back on now with very fond memories in a strange way.
So I've got a quick question off the back of that. Have you had a situation since then that you've asked somebody to sit alongside you in something? Because obviously that's helped you massively. That could be something that we could, obviously the audience are looking to level up their leadership journey. But I always sometimes talk about the fact that we're helping others. So the fact that not you being the, oh, I've got, come and follow me, I know all the answers. But have you had that experience? Have you passed that forward?
Yeah, probably not in the direct sense of kind of having someone physically by my side during a crisis. But I think what I do always try and do as part of my day job is have those people that you can draw on and kind of have that conversation with. And sometimes they are people within your team, sometimes they're people kind of in the wider organization, but sometimes they're people completely removed from the situation. And the power of just being able to pick up the phone to somebody and go, I just need you to listen for 5 minutes. I just want to talk something out and I want you to give me a view. And I say sometimes that can, you need somebody that's got, an insight into the situation you're dealing with, but very often it's people that are completely removed from it that will give you an angle on something that you just weren't expecting and can make you have that real sort of, oh, do you know what? I hadn't really thought about it like that. So yes, having those people and knowing who to draw on in what situation, yes, is really important.
Yeah, and also it's a great message because people at certain levels, I'm just going to generalize it as levels of senior managers and above, are sometimes deemed self-pressure, but also external pressure that you have all the answers. And you're in those positions because you know a lot. And so it's been quite refreshing on the podcast over the last couple of years since episode 1 that we've had people go, no, I don't know all the answers. And that's why I'm really encouraged to bring the people involved as well. I've got a question in regards to your M&S experience that you said about when you started managing and having teams. And I've just written it down here about leading up in age. So being in what sort of things have you learned over time about having people, because it happened in the military to me a couple of times, delivering leadership training to people who had been in a lot longer than me and thinking, oh, who's this young whippersnapper that thinks he knows loads about leadership? And obviously that's not the case. It's the facilitating the conversation around it, giving the space. But what have you learned over having a diversity of age in a team that you're going to be responsible for?
Yeah, I think for me, it's recognizing the fact that however long somebody has been with an organization, however old or young they are, there will be something that you can learn from them. And I think what I always tried to do was to show that slight kind of vulnerability, if you like, of actually, I don't know it all. I'm really keen to learn from your experience. And sometimes that may be, in a positive way, something that somebody's doing very well. But sometimes it might be actually some more challenging behavior that you think, actually, I'm not really kind of comfortable with this, but I don't feel quite, empowered enough to go in and sit down with that individual straight away and go, stop doing it. But sometimes actually showing a bit of, okay, talk me through a little bit about what you're doing, and actually kind of building a bit of trust and a bit of a rapport that way can then kind of lead you into understanding what's kind of driving that individual, what's making them tick, and therefore what levers you can potentially pull to maybe help kind of move that behavior on a little bit, because it can be challenging at times with people tied into an organization that maybe don't want to be there anymore, but actually maybe aren't quite brave enough to admit it.
Yeah. Amazing. We were just chatting before we jumped on as well about your current challenges and as an organisation, deployment and team hours, as I know, delivering and facilitating in the organisation is a hot topic right now. And we said about obviously large organisation, lots of moving parts, lots of locations, and lots of diversity in the portfolio of what you're trying to help move forward with regards to recruitment and hours. How are you dealing with that right now? We talked about it as a bigger thing, but then being specific, it's kind of like a big beast, a big challenge right now, isn't it? And not just in your sector, in your organisation, but I thought it'd be quite a big, interesting thing to sort of like, how are you overcoming those challenges?
Yeah, and as you say, it is a challenge at the moment, and you know, and it's not a consistent challenge. Different parts of the organisation, parts of the country are facing different challenges. It's not always necessarily about a shortage of people. Sometimes it's about the right skills. Sometimes it's about, you know, too many people, or kind of people, like I say, that they're in the organisation that maybe should be finding their happiness elsewhere. So I think you kind of have to start by recognising that, yeah, there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to it, and neither is it going to be fixed purely by a kind of a systemic approach. You know, a lot of managers that I talk to are very quick to kind of look at the system, or the system is not working for me, or I can't get the system to do this, or it's not right for my pub. And whilst there'll always be an element of that, actually what has a bigger impact is them as a manager or them as a leader, how they're working with those individuals. And there is almost a direct kind of correlation between how you kind of treat your team and what you get back from them. And I always sort of remind them of when we've, you know, faced the tough times through the kind of the recent pandemic, all of the positive things that the organisation did to look after its people, and the feedback and the kind of response that engendered. It's like, well, you don't need a pandemic to apply some of those principles. Actually, just kind of doing the right thing by your team, being fair and consistent with them, respecting their lives outside of work, listening to them, understanding them, you'll get far more from them, and far more kind of cooperation than kind of almost that kind of, you know, I'm going to have fight against the system. So yeah, very much about how people are led rather than the system that you're using to lead them.
Yeah, I love that. And again, it's been great to hear some of the stories and the amount of challenges. And like I said, we talk about the language of something is challenging. Like, you can get up for a challenge, can't you? And it's not hard. It's challenging.
Yeah.
So regards to, because I'm really, from what we've been doing with Greene King as part of EY Lane 4, it's been really exciting to be part of that, with the amount of people that you're going through a culture change. From your perspective, being there for just a year, because I know it was all developed long before that, with your experience in other organisations, where do you see the future, and how do you think that this piece of work has done really well and landed?
Yeah, I think the difference that I've observed with the way that Greene King has approached its kind of you know, cultural transformation piece versus maybe what I've seen in the past, I think, is this whole bit around action speaking louder than words. And I think sometimes organisations can tell a very good story. They can create some very good diagrams and logos and plaster the wall with quotes and pictures. But if people get the sense that that's not actually being borne out in reality, and particularly in the more kind of senior leadership teams, the cynicism sets in very quickly, and it becomes a very sort of trivial exercise. I think where Greene King have had the opportunity to do things differently, again, probably links back to the pandemic and the way that the organisation was able to demonstrate, you know, one of its values is we care, and therefore being able to actively demonstrate that we care and do the right thing by, you know, their teams, but also their suppliers and their customers as well, adds so much more kind of gravitas and kind of weight to what the business is trying to do. And therefore, when people hear things like we care, they have okay, yes, I get what that means now. I understand that the organisation is serious about that, and I understand what that means for me, rather than just it's a logo or it's a screensaver. And I think that will ultimately stand them in great stead for then embedding, you know, these kind of values and behaviours going forward, because they're coming from a much stronger, credible base.
Yeah, from your perspective as well, I've done a little bit of work with organisations before where the senior leadership team haven't been involved, which, like you said, has got such a big impact. So from your perspective, how important is that inclusion of everybody and that consistency over time? Because that's the other message, isn't it? This isn't going to, almost if it does change overnight, that's more worrying than not changing as well, because it comes across fake. And so from your perspective, what's the consistency over time piece now looking like?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think it should feel challenging in the first few months, because as you say, if it feels too easy, there's a good chance that it's not properly embedded and it's a very kind of superficial thing. So, you know, it will feel like a little bit of an uphill struggle. But I think it links back to something you mentioned earlier about the leaders of the business not being afraid to say, do you know what, we don't have all the answers, or we don't necessarily know the best way to kind of move this forward. But what we are going to do is we're going to listen and we're going to learn, and together, you know, we'll kind of build our way through it and recognize the value that everybody at every level in the organization can bring. You know, I'm a strong believer in the people closest to the problems have the best solutions, and you find that time and time again. Certainly from my world in deployment, you walk into a pub and talk to somebody behind the bar around, you know, what makes it challenging, and they'll tell you straight away what the problem is. And I think organisationally, the more of that we can do, the more that we can listen at every level of the organisation, rather than feeling it's got to be a top-down approach, will be ultimately what builds that sustainability and that success in the future.
Amazing. Brilliant. That's 20 minutes. That's done.
Wow.
That was great finish. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's been amazing insight, and like I said, listening to your message land really well a couple of times this year. I knew I had to reach out, and you'd spent a day with me in one of the facilitation groups and know about my timings as well. That was mentioned. So thank you so much for your time today. So guys, make sure you reach out, tell us what your takeaway was from this episode. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you follow us on your podcast provider. Remember, episode 100 is on its way. It's so exciting to bring that to you. It's been an amazing journey, and amazing people like Andy have really added value over the time on the podcast. So every Wednesday 6 a.m, an amazing person coming on, sharing their insights and adding value to your leadership journey. So Andy, thank you so much again.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
And we'll see you all next week, ladies and gents. Take care. Bye.